Welcome to Connect, the monthly series to connect you with your community. In each episode, we speak with experts, innovators, and community members and explore themes of loneliness, social connection, and healthy aging across Massachusetts. I'm your host, Sandra Harris, the State President of AARP Massachusetts and co-leader of the Massachusetts Coalition to Build Community and End Loneliness. In today's episode, we'll explore the challenges faced by our unsung heroes, our family caregivers, and the vital role they play in their families and communities. Caregivers are the backbone of our nation's caregiving system. In Massachusetts alone, there are more than 780,000 caregivers. These dedicated caregivers provide $15.1 billion worth of unpaid labor each year. Their efforts are what allows their older parents, spouses, or other loved ones to live independently and with dignity instead of being forced into nursing homes. Most of the people doing all that unpaid work are also trying to juggle paying jobs. Many are forced to reduce their hours or quit entirely. The physical, emotional, and the financial toll of family caregivers is enormous. And while caregivers span all generations, a recent study found that more young people providing care, including 6% of Gen Z and 20% of millennials. They are our loved ones, our friends, and our neighbors. As the demand for caregiving rises with an aging population, more must be done to support their vital work. What can we do to support them better? Today, a caregiving expert will share insights and practical advice on how we can all help make caregiving a more manageable and rewarding experience. Crystal Polizzotti is the Director of Family Caregiving Support at AgeSpan, a nonprofit agency helping people in Northeast Massachusetts maintain their highest level of independence, health, and safety as they age. Crystal, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good. Crystal, before you begin, why don't you tell us something about yourself? What attracted you to this caregiving space, and what is your role as Director of Family Support Programs at AgeSpan?
I am the Director of the Family Caregiver Support Program at AgeSpan. We are the largest aging service access point in Massachusetts, otherwise known as an ASAP. We're also a AAA, an area agency on aging. The agency does many things. In my department, it is specifically designed to support the family caregivers. As you mentioned in the beginning, these family members step up to the plate, help their loved ones every day, and it often goes unnoticed. So this program and my department was developed to do just that, check on them and support them. Everybody knows a family caregiver and will probably be one at some point. I have been a family caregiver on a personal level. I have a brother on the spectrum. My grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. She has sadly passed, but I was a caregiver to both of them at one point, and it always touched my heart in a special way. I did direct service right out of college. I have a social work background. I did direct service in New Hampshire for a decade. And then after that, I met the end of the road with that. It was time to move on. I took care of the same young man every day for 10 years. Still have a wonderful relationship with him to this day. And then that led me to AgeSpan, which at the time was known as Elder Services of the Merrimack Valley. And I started my career at AgeSpan in the Healthy Living Center, managing the caregiver evidence-based programs, and that was my first exposure to it. I had been a caregiver personally, and now I was supporting other family caregivers in my job, in my new role at the agency, and I had an aha moment, like this was where I was supposed to be. And I just continued to grow and moved into director of the Family Caregiver Program about 3 years ago. And I've been at the agency for a total of 8 years now. In a couple weeks, it'll be 8 years.
Oh, wonderful. So, can you give us an example of how you help a caregiver? Can you just share with us an example of your work?
Sure, absolutely. So we often see that family caregivers don't reach out until crisis mode, but we don't want that to be the case. It's never too early for family caregivers to reach out, and we do find that sometimes our department is the entryway to the agency. The agency does many things: home care, nutrition like Meals on Wheels, and the list goes on and on. So we sometimes are that gateway to the other services, which is what we want, right? But when family members are feeling overwhelmed, burdened, maybe they recently had a diagnosis from their loved one, that is when they come to us. I would say we get most of our referrals from our home care managers, the ones who are in the home every day checking in on our consumers, and then they come across a spouse, an adult child who are helping with the care, and they will refer them to our department. Senior centers, councils on agings make a lot of referrals, healthcare entities as well. And then you can make a self-referral as a family caregiver. And step one is just getting to know them, right? We really just want to learn about their caregiving journey. What does a normal day look like for them? How much are they doing for their loved ones? And most importantly, we want to check in on them. We want to ask them, how are you doing? How's your stress level? What are you doing to fill your cup? And I find that when I ask family members or family caregivers that question, they either laugh or cry. And I almost always get, well, nobody's asked me about me. And that's why this department was developed, to support them. And you know, we can do many things. We can be there as a counselor and a support and help with case management. Like I mentioned, we make a lot of referrals within the agency and outside of the agency, just really connecting them to a wide network of support, because it's not easy. Caregiving is a 24/7 job, right? Whether you're with your care recipient or not, you're thinking about them. You're making phone calls for them. They really never have a chance to fully tune out. And that is our goal in the Family Caregiver Support Program, is to get enough services and supports in place to give them a little breathing room. And that looks different for everyone.
You talk about the service that AgeSpan provides, and you obviously have a certain service area. But are there other agencies that provide similar services?
There is an ASAP, or an Aging Service Access Point, that covers every city and town in the state of Massachusetts. I believe there's about 25 of them now. A lot of them are merging, so it's hard to keep up of the exact number, but we have around 25 ASAPs in the state. Every city and town is covered by an ASAP, and every ASAP has a family caregiver support program.
Okay, good. So Crystal, who is a caregiver? Define a caregiving for us.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I always like to start there, so I'm glad you asked. Not everybody identifies as a family caregiver. We often hear, well, that's my husband, that's my wife, that's my parent. So we really have to take a step back and say, well, let's make a list of all the things you're doing. You know, you're managing medications, you're planning out their days, you're transporting them to doctors, the supermarket, whatever it might be. You're bathing them. And I like to break down the list of tasks and then assign the role to that. So saying things like, oh, you're managing their medications like a nurse or doctor would. And oh, you're transporting them like an Uber or Lyft driver would. And I think attaching an occupation to these tasks really helps them realize that it is a job, and they're wearing a lot of hats, and they're filling a lot of roles, and that makes you a family caregiver. I'll never forget, I called this one gentleman, I received a referral, and I saw that it was a gentleman caring for his brother who had recently had a stroke and was showing signs of cognitive impairment, and it really came out of nowhere, and they were on the younger side. And when I called this gentleman and I started the phone call with, I see you're a caregiver to your brother. And he stopped me in my tracks and he said, well, I'm not a caregiver, I'm just his brother. And I had to really go through all the things that he was doing, and that makes him a caregiver. And caregivers don't always identify as that, but we identify them as that. because they are doing so much and we want to give them credit for that.
So what are some misconceptions about caregiving and caregivers?
Sure. I think a misconception is when you hear caregiver, that's a professional, right? Everything's handled by professionals, or it's mostly women in the caregiving role, or, oh, caring for your loved one at home must be so inexpensive, right? You're saving so much money. Those are the common misconceptions, and the truth is caregiving looks different for everyone, and caregiving is very expensive. You stated some of that in the beginning, how much money these family members are spending, and it can be really exhausting, and caregivers look different depending on the family dynamic, right? It could also be somebody caring for their adult child who has special needs or intellectual or developmental disabilities. In our program, we even support grandparents raising grandchildren, which is the newer, not newest, we added that bucket of caregivers, is what I should say, after the program had been running for a few years, and it was largely a result of the opioid epidemic. We were now seeing these older adults who were in retirement age, done raising children, and their adults are in active addiction or have mental health issues, and now they're stepping in to raise children at 65, 75, 85. So caregiving looks different for everyone, and it doesn't fit in a box.
And as we look at the research, we are finding nationwide that we're more young people, especially Gen Z. Are you seeing that in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. To enroll in our program, you only have to be 18 years old. And I would say the youngest caregiver enrolled in our program is probably around 20 years old, early 20s. And we're seeing that sometimes grandchildren are now stepping in to care for their grandparents, especially folks who live in multi-generational homes, which is very common. You just naturally get thrown into caregiving, and it's expected of you. And I really like to break that down for them and say, you're entitled to a quality of life, and your needs and health and mental well-being is just as important. So we really need to dissect what's going on to make sure everybody is being checked on and they don't feel isolated and alone.
Okay. From your work and your perspective, what are the major challenges that caregivers provide?
Burnout. I would say burnout is a huge risk factor and a challenge that they don't even realize that they're heading towards. They're taking on so much, and now they're putting off their own needs, especially spouse caregivers. Data shows that spouse caregivers stop going to their own checkups and their well-being appointments because they're doing so much for their loved one, and they're at the doctor all the time. When it's time for their physical or their dental cleaning, they say, oh, I'm just going to cancel. I can't spend another day at the doctor. And that's the last thing that we want. And it can be challenging for many reasons. I think it's very isolating. You stop wanting to do things that you enjoy. You don't want to dump on others, so you stay in and you keep it to yourself. And caregiving is mentally, physically, emotionally, and financially exhausting. And we have to remind caregivers of that and how important it is for them to acknowledge all of that and to, reach out for help.
Okay. You've mentioned the financial burden associated with caregiving. And we know that the average caregiver spends up to $7,242 out-of-pocket expenses. And it could be more for long-distance caregiving.
Yes.
But are there other hidden costs that are not included in the $7,000?
Yeah, I think the hidden costs are just the stress on the family dynamic. They're sacrificing their own time. Of course, the financial piece is a huge burden. And, for example, I would say the most common type of referral we get to our program is somebody caring for a loved one with dementia. I would feel comfortable saying that's about 80% of our referrals. And when you're thinking about cognitive impairment or dementia, it is progressive, right? So in the early stages, it might be manageable and they're thinking, okay, I can do this. But as time goes on and that disease progresses, the needs just increase, and now it's 10 years in and the caregiver is more tired than ever and the needs of their loved one is higher than ever. So it really is a recipe for disaster if they don't have some supports in place. And I just think the isolation, the financial burden, and just putting their own needs off, the loss of friends and family. And, you know, I run several support groups, and I have this one gentleman. He's an older adult and he's caring for his wife, and they're in their 80s, and he always harps on, you know, I have 3 sons and they're wonderful sons, but they're not nurturers and they don't understand about checking in, and they think a phone call once a week is enough, and you know, their mom has dementia. That phone call doesn't go as far anymore. It's really about showing up. And we find that it's really difficult for these family members to ask for help, right? For a lot of reasons. There's a stigma. We don't want to show that we're weak or that we need help. We don't want to lose our independence, and asking for help can allude to that. And it's just, even the family members that are closest to you, they push away because you don't know what to expect when there's something like dementia going on, and the unknown is scary, and you know, it really affects the whole dynamic.
Also, we know that a number of caregivers oftentimes have to quit their jobs, right?
Yes.
So there's an additional hidden cost to that, right? I mean, when you have to quit your job, you use your health care benefits. You look at, you're no longer contributing to your retirement.
Yep.
Can you speak a little bit about that and that huge hidden cost?
Yeah, we often find that these family caregivers end up spending their life savings, their retirements, on the care for their loved one. And I often hear from them, you know, we were supposed to travel the world with this money, or, you know, this was to spend on our family and share with our grandchildren, and there's nothing left. And it really puts spouse caregivers at risk, because if they are thinking about, you know, long-term care or placing their loved one, if it's getting to that point where they can no longer manage it at home, you know, you really have to take a deep dive into your finances, and a lot of people aren't aware, and they lose a lot of money. And it's just really tough, and you know, what they envision for themselves is just no longer there. So they're coming to terms with that. They're coming to terms with the changes in their loved ones, and it's a lot for anyone to manage. And then there's these sandwich generation caregivers, right? So they're the ones who are raising little kids and caring for their aging parents. And they find themselves, you know, the kid has a cough, they can't go to school. Mom had a fall, you can't go to work. And now the caregiver really has to step up and can't be in more than one place at once. And, you know, thank goodness for things like PMFLA, where they can tap into some paid time, but it's truly not enough. And we really need to continue to advocate for these family members who are doing this, so, you know, organizations and companies understand that that flexibility is key. And I just enrolled a new caregiver. She's very young. She's 57 years old. Her husband is 62 and he has Parkinson's. He was diagnosed about 5 years ago, and he can no longer work, and they're living on her income. And you know, when I hear that a caregiver is still working full time, I always ask, you know, how is your employer? Are they understanding? Are you openly communicating with them? And she said, I'm choosing not to tell them the details. And I thought, wow, you know, she is feeling that pressure and that stigma at work, that if she overshares, that could jeopardize her role at her organization. And it was just so eye-opening. I knew that was a problem, but being in this role and always advocating for these family members, I hope that other organizations do the same, but that's just not the case.
Are there any efforts being made to make employers more sensitive to the needs of caregiving?
There is. I mean, I can't speak for every employer. You know, I know in the social services world, we get it. We're advocating a lot. There's constant reminders of that work-life balance and how important that is. And I think the pandemic, as terrible as it was, it really shone a light on these family members who are doing all this work, when you no longer could have folks come in and everything was closed down. And, it was really a silver lining for these families, because now family caregiver is a hot topic, and we're starting to go in that direction. But, it's truly never enough. A lot more work needs to be done.
Okay. And because caregiving is such a hot topic, I think we can look at people in terms of three categories: those for being cared for, those who are giving care, and those who will need care. And with such an aging population, how do we create an advocacy agenda to make sure more is being done to support our caregivers?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that's always top of mind to me. We really need to have access to paid family leave on a long-term, consistent basis. Like I said, the flexible work arrangements, reimbursing these families for the care that they're paying out of pocket, and advocating to your local elected officials. I think the most important thing to do is sharing your story, which is easier said than done, right? A lot of people don't want to put themselves out there. But I know at AgeSpan, we work really hard to share stories, and we can just use a first name if folks don't want to be put out there. There are ways to share your story without putting yourself out there to the public 100%, but it's a great way to raise awareness, is hearing these stories from start to finish, where the family was at, the services that they use that help, and where they are today. And it's really impactful to hear those stories firsthand.
What are some practical tips or strategies that you'd like to provide to caregivers on maintaining their well-being?
Yeah, self-care, self-care, self-care. We can't say it enough. I mean, that is really the underlying goal of the Family Caregiver Support Program. It's tapping into these services that my program can offer that in return will give that caregiver a break. I always use the airplane example, right? What do they say? In case of an emergency, put on your mask before you help someone else. I say that all the time. I drive myself crazy with it, but it's so true in the caregiving situation. I often say, you're acting like the Energizer Bunny, but if your batteries run out, you're no use to your loved one. You're no use to anyone. So what can we do to take a few things off your plate? And one of the lovely services that my program can offer is short-term scholarships. So we can pay for respite care. And we know respite care looks different for every family, right? It's not one size fits all. It might be getting their loved one out of the house to an adult day health program, or it might be having a home health aide come in. Or maybe they're not even at the level of home health aide yet, just having a companion for their loved one, somebody to come and sit for 3-4 hours at a time. So the care recipient is engaged and has some social interaction, and the family caregiver can go to Market Basket or take a nap. I often get asked by family caregivers, they're ready for the help and they're excited for the help, and then they'll say, well, I don't have anywhere to go for 4 hours. And I simply say, you don't have to go anywhere. You could take a nap. You could just check out and put in some headphones and take a bubble bath. Little things like that go a long way. We really want to make it easy. And another result of the pandemic, when there was a worker shortage, is we started being able to offer a stipend to someone they know. We talked a little bit about how difficult it is to ask for help, right? But sometimes if you can add a little financial compensation to that, it's an easier ask. So we can be as flexible with our scholarships as to, if there's an adult child, we can stipend that adult child so their mom can get a break from caring for their dad for a little bit. And they're all self-directed. So, the Family Caregiver Support Program can use the federal funding to pay for these things, but the family schedules it and chooses their providers and their person, and it's really specialized to their needs. I'm not making any decisions for them. They know their loved one best, and I remind them of that all the time.
For those who are watching and are not aware of the programs like AgeSpan, How do they get more information? How do they find the ASAP in their area?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always encourage folks to go to mass.gov. That is a great place to start. The ASAPs are broken down by city and town. You can find yours listed right there. Everyone has a direct line where you can call the information and referrals team, and that's a great place to start. I can speak for our information and referrals team. They're amazing. They know the ins and outs of our agency and all the departments so well that you can tell them a little bit and they'll be able to say, okay, we need a home care referral, we need a family caregiver referral, we need a nutrition referral, and they get things moving really quickly. So mass.gov is a great place to start to find your local ASAP, and then all the services will be broken down on the individual websites.
As we promote stronger, more connected communities and encourage residents to really embrace the values of kindness, respect, and caring for each other, what can we do to help our neighbors who are caregivers?
I love that question, and I think it's something that's often overlooked. But reach out, check in on your loved ones, ask them if they're okay, remind them that they're not alone. Maybe you've come across a service in your organization, in your area, that might not be the right fit for you, but somebody that you know or love could benefit. Something like a support group or a memory cafe, or an evidence-based workshop that's happening at the local Council on Aging. Taking those small steps really is heading towards the greater good. And I think it goes a long way just to check in on someone and make time. And, I often come across families where there are multiple family caregivers at the table. There's always that one primary caregiver where the burden falls, right? They're taking on the brunt of most of the day-to-day work. But when you do have a family dynamic, and they don't even have to be relatives, it could be neighbors, it could be a network of, your college friends, whatever it may be. Conquer and divide, right? If you have a grandson who maybe just got his license and loves getting out in the car, maybe he picks up groceries every Friday, right? Maybe you have an adult daughter who's really good at managing finances. Let her handle the bill pay. Maybe you have another daughter who does fill in that nurturer role. Let her come and sit with dad every Saturday. And then maybe there's an uncle or a brother who can help around the yard. That's really ideally what we want to see, is everybody pitching in, doing a little bit to get through the day. But sadly that's not the case for everyone. So it's always good to check into your local resources to find similar types of help.
Okay, good. Crystal, this has been wonderful. Before leaving, what is the one message you'd like to leave a family caregiver today?
I would just like to say thank you for all you do. It's admirable. Your loved one is lucky to have you. And I know that caregiving can often feel like a thankless job, but it's really important to find the positives of being caregivers in little things like a smile or a thank you or a hug from your loved one, or even just a laugh, enjoying something silly and simple. I think that's really important and can go a long way.
Crystal, thank you so much for being with us today. Your dedication and passion for caregiving is truly inspiring. So thank you for sharing your invaluable insights and for all you do to support family caregivers in your area. Your work makes a profound difference, and we are deeply grateful for your contributions and the contributions of AgeSpan. And to you, our audience, thank you for joining us on this important issue. Let's work together to ensure our family members, loved ones, and neighbors who are family caregivers receive the grace, the recognition, the support, and the resources they need to continue their invaluable work. As always, we invite you to join us again next month for another episode of Connect. Until then, let's reach out and stay connected to those we love, our friends and our neighbors, and especially our caregivers. Visit us at InLonelinessMA to watch past episodes of Connect, to learn more about the coalition and find ways you can join the movement helping to alleviate loneliness and promote healthy aging in Massachusetts.